Hello and welcome to Raise a Glass, the podcast where we talk about the stories and storytellers that shape us. I am Hunter Danson,
And I am Eric Lintela.
and we are very excited to do a movie double header about men and horses and westerns. I don't know what the theme is.
Cowboys.
Yeah. But before we get there, what's in your glass, Eric?
Today, as this is our morning edition,
hmm
I have in my Wheel of Time inspired Perrin handcrafted coffee mug a beautiful locally roasted Guatemalan roast from New City Cafe
Mm.
with just a little bit of half and half to turn the color to a beautiful, I don't know, hazel.
Uh-huh.
This is my favorite coffee to drink. It's just smooth. It's like it's not bitter, but it still has got a good bite to it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah, I drink this every morning. In fact, I pretty much do. Hunter, what is in your glass?
Well, I've had my morning coffee already, but usually what I do every morning is I will put milk, whole milk, in my coffee mug to just get the last dregs of the coffee. And I'm a milkaholic, as Eric knows. I drink a lot of milk, so this is my morning cup of milk
I
after
love
my
it.
coffee.
Hunter, are you guys still getting the modern day milkman milk?
Yeah, we don't get it every week. Sometimes we pause it. Um, but yeah, we have a milkman that brings milk from a local farm in glass bottles. Um, and it's good. I really like the cream line milk. You have to like shake it before you
Mm.
pour it because there's still cream in it. Um,
If you talk too much
yeah.
like this, people are going to think you live in Vermont, not Connecticut.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't want to tell people too much because everyone goes from Connecticut to Vermont to like see leaves and stuff. And I look around, I'm like, why do you need to, like, there's leaves here changing color. You don't have to go to Vermont. Like but Vermont has the branding um that Connecticut
All
doesn't.
about that
So
branding. Mm-hmm.
um what are you figuratively raising and pouring your morning brew for?
I have maybe this is I'm pouring out for it's just I've been in a really busy season, life and work, and just tired.
Hmm.
You know, you get in those seasons, Hunter, where you're just exhausted and kind of fatigued with making decisions and just
Oh yeah.
putting out fires and just being. And so and this weekend my wife and kids are actually on a trip to see one of my wife's friends, and so I'm actually pouring out. They left this morning, so I've already missed them so much. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm probably raising a glass to having some time in the next couple of days to kind of recenter myself. I just finished a book, and so my hope is to spend time in quiet. I've got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
projects I'm working on outside.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, neither of those are quite obviously pours and raise a glass, but they're very connected and they're very central to my mind right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hunter, how about you?
uh I think my pour is very similar to yours. I just feel pretty disoriented lately, tired and disoriented, and working on book two has been pretty hard. I'm like at a big climax where everything is going on, and I feel like I have to. So much of my mental energy is like taken up with trying to hold the whole series in my head as I'm writing this,
Mm.
that I'm just like vaguely going about everything else that I have to do in my life. It just I have this thing in the back of my mind, and so yeah, pouring one out for just disorientation and being tired. And I haven't had the best habits, but I'm getting there. Um, and I'm raising a glass to 21 Pilots
Okay.
because my wife and my sister and I went on Saturday night to go see 21 Pilots live in Boston. Made the pilgrimage. It's kind of a drive, and the Boston roads are just wow. I didn't know roads could be so bad, but once we got there, we got in. It was like it's like the tip. Like 21 Pilots fans are really special because it was a whole stadium, and he has multiple songs where there's like 40-second rap breaks, and he would just let the audience do the rap break, like a 45-second rap break, and the audience stayed on time, and did the whole thing. A whole stadium full of people doing these like pretty involved lyrics, um, and it was amazing. Really kind of like a culmination for 21 Pilots fans who've had these songs in their minds for so long, and then it all comes together. It's really beautiful. Um, I don't. I struggle to think of any band that I'd really, buy the tickets because they're not cheap, and go there, pay for parking, and do all that stuff. That like, there's not many bands I'd do that for, and 21 Pilots is really worth it for us. So,
That's great.
and shout out to my sister. It was like her first real proper concert. Um, so it was really special to share that with her. Um,
Is she a big 21 Pilots fan too?
oh yeah, yeah. Multiple generations in the Danson family, 21 Pilots fans.
I love it. Hunter, I'm bringing the movie Shane to us today, which was written in 1953 by George Stevens. Came out about 64 years before The Rider, which you're bringing to us today. And it's a story about a gunslinger named Shane
Mm-hmm.
who comes down from the mountains during a homesteading period in American history to hang up his gun and become a homesteader on Joe's farm, Joe and
Mm-hmm.
Mary Ellen,
Yeah.
Mary Ellen's farm with their little son Joey.
Mm-hmm.
But some things go down. There's some cattle ranchers that are trying to lay claim to this homesteading ranches, and after a significant amount of time of not touching his gun, Shane brings out his gun again to confront the evil gunslinger that is brought in by these cattle ranchers
Mm-hmm.
to save the day and ride off into the sunset.
Yeah. Except it's not a sunset, is it?
It's not,
He
and
rides off into the night.
that matters. And this is actually one of the things that
Right.
one of the pieces that makes this a really unique among westerns. Right, it is the gunslinger doesn't want to be a gunslinger.
Mm-hmm.
He spends so much of this movie without his gun, and we see in Shane and in all of the characters, all of them, minus the pale rider, the black vest and the black hat,
Mm-hmm.
struggles between good and evil. It's
Mm-hmm.
not simply good character, bad character. Even though we know who the better characters are, it's not as cut and dry as many other westerns, especially at that time. We can talk about that. But the real reason I had us watch this particular film is not even primarily because I like it, but because this was one of the first films I watched in a course in college,
Mm-hmm.
a course called Religion and Film, that ended up changing the way I watch movies. And so a shout out quickly to a grand storyteller and teacher of stories, Professor Humphreys Brooks. He's now retired from Hamilton College. Hunter, I know you've taken courses with him. I took probably 6 courses with him over the course of my time at Hamilton, and he helped change the way I view movies. And
Hmm.
the reason why, annoyingly, I'll call things films instead of movies to some people, of which I think this is considered a film. Um, it it's even hard for me to say this is exactly the way that I see movies and films differently now, because it's been 12 years of my life
Mm.
or more in which my approach to the genre of cinema, that storytelling medium, has taken on a new shape.
Mm.
So that's the way it shaped me. And I'm excited to talk with you about some of the fun pieces about this, the historical context in which this movie came out, and why things, as well as to hear your first thoughts on it, because this is the first time you saw this movie, right?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you for suggesting this movie. I was happy to see when I took it out of the library that it's one of the 100, 100 greatest films of the American Film Institute. Our library puts a little sticker on all of them,
I love
and
that.
we've been trying to watch all of them.
Oh,
Whenever we go
amazing.
to the library, we try and get one of the greatest movies. Um, they're usually pretty good. Some are better than, we like some better than others, but I really enjoyed this one. Um, it's amazing how fresh it feels for a movie, a western, which is a genre that has really been done a lot.
So many times.
Um, yeah, and I love westerns. I used to watch all the Clint Eastwood westerns, Pale Rider and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and
Mm-hmm.
um, all those. And I also love True Grit. It's one of my favorite ones. The old one and the new one, especially. But I'd never seen this one, and it's it. I do think that the gunslinger trying to hang up his gun is a bit of a trope, which is maybe because of this movie. I'm not sure specifically, but I do think this movie does an amazing job, especially for how early it is, of portraying Shane. And he talks so little about what he is feeling, and yet you can gather from the context and his expressions
Mm-hmm.
that like he's really struggling, um and he is eventually forced to take up the gun um again. uh I don't know. I have a few highlights that I can give for me. Those are my general impressions. But
Yeah. Well,
and
before we
oh,
get
the setting, the mountains in the background, like oh my gosh, that had to be the Tetons or something. That was like reminded me of when I went and saw the Tetons.
the setting of both movies we're talking about today is really stunning, and the
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on silence,
Mm-hmm.
I think Shane does it really well. And I just pulled it up just so I could have a chronology in my mind. Clint Eastwood's earliest movie came out 3 years after this, so
Yeah.
in many ways, like, I'm not going to say that this was the first, but it was one of the
Mm-hmm.
first. And so things that we see as tropes
Yeah.
now, might not have been that point. In fact, and this is just a couple pieces of historical context that, diving deep, taking on notes from a decade plus ago. Actually, let me look at this. Wait. In fact, I first saw this movie 10 years ago, almost to the date. I said
Wow.
12 years earlier. I meant 10. I watched it on September 24th, 2014. Um, and actually, I think I watched this movie again I think that was actually the day I watched it. Yeah, I watched
Wow.
unknowingly. You can see here. This is September 24th. That's my most recent notes.
Wow.
10 years to the day since Weathertop, I stumbled
I
upon
watched
a
it on the
familiar sight.
23rd.
Uh,
I watched it on the 23rd
how
for the first
funny!
time.
How funny! Well, so the director for this movie, George Stevens, about 12 years after this, did another movie that, in fact, I have not seen, but I am embarrassed to say that I haven't seen it. Um, but one that everybody knows about. He directed the movie The Greatest Story Ever Told,
Hmm.
which is a story about Jesus's life.
Oh, okay.
And so, as we're watching this movie and we understand some of the pieces of the way George Stevens approached his directing, it's really important, or it's really clear that this is an Americanized understanding of Jesus. Um, and many westerns try to take on that same
Hmm.
type of trope. The I love this language. This is from my class. The basic plot line for the perfect or preferred American hero, who in some ways follows the messianic storyline, is a man of peace who prefers the security of home, only leaves home when forced to do so by an outside evil, after almost being killed, and comes back and stops the evil and saves the day. How many movies follow that
Yeah.
piece, right? It's this movie came out about 8 years after World War II, and so
Hmm.
it's also important to understand its timing in that context. In that, one of the questions of the day was how, as returning veterans, do we enter into a land where we're supposed to be at peace, where
Hmm.
the war that had defined us, right, the gunslinging that had defined us, is we've now put up our guns.
Hmm.
And so you can see that at the beginning of Shane when he comes down from the mountain, which again is a very messianic approach, or one might even argue is approach similar to Moses in the Bible, coming down with
Right.
10 Commandments. He comes down and he enters onto the homestead, Joe's homestead, where he's seen as a
Hmm.
villain immediately, but then helps keep him safe just by being there.
Hmm.
Comes down in his leathers, um, and connects with Joey, the little kid. You can
Hmm.
see at the beginning, as every time there's a loud noise or a quick movement, he reaches for his gun. Right,
Hmm.
his white handled 6 shooter. But then,
Yeah.
while eating a meal with Joe and his wife and son, he decides to help him chop down this tree trunk. This huge tree
Hmm.
trunk that Joe has been fighting with for 2 years. And I don't know about you, Hunter. That was one of my favorite moments of the entire movie because I felt like I related to it so deeply.
Oh. Uh huh.
I could imagine the two of us going out in the backyard, in your backyard or my backyard, with axes and hacking at,
Yeah.
whacking at a tree trunk for an entire day. And then he makes the statement, sometimes there ain't nothing to do except your own sweat and muscle. That's what
Hmm.
Joe says when his wife is like, "Hey, why don't you get your version of technology, your horse team, and like pull the stump out?" He's like,
Hmm.
"Nah, I've been fighting with this thing for 2 years. Like, this is this is one of the very first spaces we see. What does it look like to be a man in this
Hmm.
western? Right? To be a
Yeah.
man is to show no fear.
Hmm.
To be a man is to do things by your own sweat and muscle. To be a man is to love your wife
Hmm.
and to hold on to your wife and kids, but also to hold on to your land. And it would be better to die protecting your land than to leave in cowardice, which
Hmm.
I don't necessarily hold to that same argument. in terms of this particular context of this film. But I think within the American system of the day, especially coming from a post World War II approach, where people were signing up to protect America, which I'm all for, and joining World War II, like that's where and when this happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the context. It's I'm curious to know, like, how did this movie hit you? Back in 10 years ago. Uh, aside from like the larger. I don't know, should we go there yet or not?
Yeah, you can. I don't know
Right.
how encouraged you'll be by my answer, because I don't have too much. I remember watching this, and I remember watching this movie out of context.
Yeah.
In the sense of I don't usually somebody has to give me context in order for me to remember a movie, and then I'll remember a strikingly large number of things about that movie. But this is one that stuck in my head out of context. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing, the other ones I watched at this time were Ben-Hur and all these other ones. Like, okay, that now it's putting all those pieces in my brain. So I can say that it struck me enough that it stayed in my mind and in my subconscious in a way that when I think about westerns, like this is the movie that I'll think about. More so than a Clint Eastwood movie. Even though I've seen Clint Eastwood movies and enjoy them.
Yeah. Are there any particular scenes that stuck in your head besides the stump one? That is a classic scene. In fact, there's a whole episode of Bluey called Stump Day, where it's about how Bluey realizes that all of the work, quote unquote work, that the dads are doing, trying to get the stumps out of the lawn, is like actually playtime for them.
I love it. What I remember most is him riding down and then riding out. I remember that descending as soon as the movie started and he started descending into the valley. I was like, oh my goodness! Like this descending followed by the ascending, and then the visuals, the white gun, the pale leather, like embodying this force of good. Those are the things. So it's not even a particular scene. Of course, as the movie started and I started watching these scenes, I'm like, oh my goodness, yeah, and like, oh yeah, that one,
Right.
and the guy, the super obnoxious homesteader that plays the harmonica, this whole time, or as soon as I saw Stonewall, I was like, man, that guy's gonna, we're a spoiler filled podcast, so I'm comfortable saying that. Yeah, but were there specific scenes that stuck out to you?
Yeah, so some scenes that stuck out to me were just the setting in general, the mountains, of course. And then I thought the fight scene in the saloon,
The first one
was, yeah,
so
the first one, where they're feeling the pressure from Riker, who is the cattle rancher, who's basically he's trying to run them all off the homesteads, and he's so far they haven't used guns. He's trying to not shed any blood, trying to do it legally, but legally is he's buffaloing them, which is intimidating them, beating them, like vaguely having physical threats. And the saloon is kind of where all of Riker's henchmen hang out. While the homesteaders are working hard and cultivating the land and building their houses, there's just all these random guys drinking and I don't know, just hanging out all day at the saloon. Um, and the first time that Shane goes to the saloon, he goes there. The saloon is attached to the general store, and Shane goes to get work clothes to change out of his leathers, and he gets work clothes, and then he decides to get a soda pop for the kid, and he goes into the saloon, and they these guys start eyeing him up, and he one guy gets a whiskey and like spills it on him, and Shane doesn't really do anything. So they fast forward, everybody, all the homesteaders get together and go to the general store together to show solidarity and safety in numbers. And Shane goes into the saloon to refill the soda pop bottle, and he orders two drinks for the guy who threw the whiskey on him. One whiskey for him, and then he takes the other one and he spills it on the guy and punches him in the face. And
Yep.
it, and this is after a fair amount of buffaloing and stuff, so it's not like it's not unprovoked. It feels kind of righteous for Shane to do this in the movie. And of course he's outnumbered. He handily beats the guy, but then the other guys start joining in, and then Joe Starrett's like, I'm gonna go help out because it's so awkward because all the families are in the general side of the saloon, and there's like no one knows what to do when the fight starts breaking
Yep.
out. And like it was interesting because if you've ever seen any kind of like physical altercation in real life, it's incredibly awkward, and like really weird and really fast and strange. And it, they make it dramatic in the movie, but it still like retains that very strange awkwardness of the violence. And I thought that was very well done. And it's kind of like a bro moment, Joe and Shane fighting back to back,
Yep.
and they win eventually. But that's really the inciting incident for Riker to bring in the gunslinger Wilson. Um, and I guess that kind of leads into the second one for me, which is the when Wilson kills Tori. That whole scene, the setup, because Wilson is on Tori's gonna go into the saloon to talk about something. Wilson kind of eggs him on, and his whole plan is to get Tori to draw first so that Wilson can draw and then shoot him, and not have it be
Because that's legal.
murder. Yeah, because that's legal, right? It's self-defense. And the whole setup of that, where you have Tori kind of walking in, and Wilson is just standing on the porch of the saloon, and Tori's walking through the mud, like picking his way through the mud, and he's sort of like repelled by Wilson. He goes to walk on the porch, and Wilson kind of stands to block him, and Tori is stuck in the mud this whole time, so that Tori is like below Wilson in the shot the entire time.
Yeah.
And it's just this really amazing setup where you know exactly what's going to happen, but there's so much tension.
For so
And
long in this movie.
yeah,
Like, this guy is
yeah,
going to get killed. Like, this is...
yeah, yeah. And then finally when he shoots and Wilson shoots him, and Tori is just laid out in the mud, and it's really masterful scene.
I would say the scene following that, the burial scene, is the emotional pinnacle of the movie. Or right before it, I think it's between that and kind of the second to last scene. Right, because it then leads to this beautiful scene where he's being buried, and one of the other homesteader family is planning on leaving the valley. Literally has everything packed up to go, and they're singing "Abide with Me." The second time we're hearing that song sung over his grave, and there's this harmonica playing um, this beautiful sad song, and then you see the pans from the homesteaders singing over the song in a cemetery, and it just pans right, and it keeps panning until it pans into the town, and then
Mm-hmm.
the music changes immediately, and you zoom in. I think you zoom in, and then you hear the Riker and his men talking,
Mm-hmm.
and then it comes back, and you see the homesteader's house they're planning on leaving is on fire,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when Joe shares this. No, is it Joe or is it Shane? I think they both speak, but there's an emotional speech shared, and I think Shane adds to it. Right,
Mm-hmm.
Joe's the primary like instigator for all of the homesteaders. He's the leader of that group,
Mm-hmm.
but um, they then make the decision: hey, we're gonna rebuild this home together. And the homesteaders that
Yeah.
are planning on leaving come back, decide to go back to rebuild that home, and to not let themselves be the Lewis family, to not let themselves be moved from the valley. And it's right after
Mm-hmm.
that, an hour and a half, an hour and 35 minutes into this movie, that Shane takes out his guns to be a weapon for the first
Right.
time since the opening.
Right. Yeah. And I got one more
Go for it.
that I think could probably lead us into a
I've,
somewhat
I've got close.
discussion of the themes.
Okay,
Okay. Um, I think the other scene for me is in that same. I don't know if it's directly. I think it's after that when Joe comes back to his ranch and he finds Riker waiting for him, and he's got his Shane and his wife and his son in the buggy, and they come in and Riker's got a bunch of guys surrounding them, and they have this discussion where Rikers is like, I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you a good price for your home. I'll buy it off you. Um, and Joe's like, no, I'm not selling. And Riker's just like, well, if you don't sell, then you're gonna die, basically. Um, and threatens him. And they have this like pretty deep discussion about like what is motivating Riker, what it means to be a landowning man in America. Um, and one of the lines that I wrote down was Riker has talks about how he came into this country when there was no one there and
mm-hmm.
did a lot of work and fought hard to make this land available, and then the homesteaders come in and get it for free. And this is why Riker thinks that it all belongs to him
Yep.
because he's done all of the quote unquote work. And Joe is like, well, it wasn't really yours to begin with. um, uh, and he also says, I don't, I don't, I'm not against you believing that you have a right, but you think that you have the right to say that nobody else has any.
Mm.
Which, when I think about our sort of cultural moment and where we are with manhood, which I know is a very general, huge general discussion, but I think, for me personally, I see a tension between like I guess not even just manhood, but like uh socio-political discussion, I guess, of people saying that, you know, their rights matter more than others. And this is coming from both sides of the discussions. Um, and I think for men in general, like there's a confusion about like how do we approach violence because in westerns, um, especially like um, men are sort of defined by how they use their violence, and I'm not sure I agree with this 100%, but I think that like violence is definitely like a key facet of what makes a man. You know,
Mm,
is that's like in general, men are good at violence in general, um, compared to women. It's just the like physically throughout history that has been kind of the role is defined by violence. But you know, the question is, do you use your violence to um, take and to dominate, or do you use it to defend and protect? Um, and it's a very kind of muddy, gray discussion. But I think this movie really I think that's where this movie says, okay, Shane is using his violence to defend, and it's okay to kill if it's justified. I don't know. In this movie.
there's so much to take from that because there's some amazing quotes, and I think there's two primary arguments happening in this movie about guns and violence.
Mhm.
But a quintessential moment that happens before the final gunfight, right? It ends in a similar way to a lot of westerns. The gunfight between
Mhm.
Shane and the bad guy, and Shane wins. Um, the scene before that, though, I think is a unique one to Shane
Oh,
because as
yeah.
Shane is preparing to go and fight Riker and fight Wilson, the gunman that Riker has hired, Shane gets into a fight with Joe because Joe does not want Shane to fight his battle.
Mhm.
Joe doesn't want to be seen as a coward. Joe doesn't want Shane to fight a battle when in reality it should be a homesteader that does it.
Mhm.
And so Shane and Joe, right before this battle starts, Joe actually takes Shane aside and pretty much says, "You're a better fit for my wife than I am. And so when I don't come back from killing Riker, when he kills me, take care of my wife." Shane doesn't verbally respond to that. I don't
Mhm.
remember. But they then end up in an all out brawl. Like they are, it is intense. They're
Mhm.
punching each other. They're rolling on the ground. There's ultimately Shane takes the handle of the butt of his gun, hits it against Joe's head, and knocks him unconscious, so that Shane can go and fight Riker and Wilson because that's what he is. And he says this. He says this statement, and I think this will relate to the rider really well. And so I want to bring it back up when we talk about that. A man has to be what he is. He can't break the mold.
Mhm.
I think the writer talks about is asking a similar question.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be who you are,
Mhm.
or who are you? Maybe is a better thing. Like, what is it that defines you? And Shane
Yeah.
has spent this entire movie trying to redefine his life, redefining it by working with axes and saws and homesteader tools. Redefine it by dancing. Redefine it by being with the homesteaders, physically changing all of his clothing, hiding his gun away. He's tried to change everything. But when it comes down to it, he realizes that a man has to be what he is. And what he is a gunfighter, not a homesteader. And
Mhm.
so that is his battle to fight. And he says this to Joey when Joey's talking about becoming a shooter and trying to kill people. He tells Joey, he said, "There's no living with a killing. You can't come back from one." Well, those two quotes are really important. the the question about manliness, violence, and in this movie guns is all tied together in what I think are two competing arguments. One is held by Mary Ellen, and one is held by Shane. And here are the two quotes that we see. Shane says, "A gun is a tool like any other. It is as good or bad as the one who holds it." That's Shane's argument. Mary Ellen's argument is, "I don't want any guns in the valley. A gun is not a good thing. A gun only means killing." And those are two competing principles
Mm-hmm.
and approaches that are at war with each other below the scenes. And the answer in this movie to it, which I don't know if it's not my answer, but the answer of this movie is Shane is leaving after killing Riker, after showing that the man that he is, the good man that he is, has killed the bad men that Riker and Wilson are with guns, right? He's used his gun as a tool argument. He's fulfilled it to completion. But then he tells Joey, who had run after him to watch the fight and apologize for saying that he hated him. There's a whole different conversation about Joey and what does it mean to be a father and who is it that he sees as his father, Joe and Shane.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. But as Shane's leaving, he tells Joey, "Tell your mom everything is all right. There aren't any guns left in the valley."
Mm-hmm.
Do you see those as competing arguments, or where do you find yourself in that space?
It's a good question. I actually think Mary Ellen is right that a gun means killing because that's what they were made for. And I do think, but I also see the necessity of Shane having a gun, and having the power to protect people who need to be protected. I my dad hunts. He taught me to shoot, so I have been around guns. I know how to use a gun. My dad was very good at explaining to me that it's a weapon, teaching me really good safe handling practices, and everything like that. And I so I don't hate guns, but I do think that there's kind of a ridiculous trend of like I don't want to rain on people's hobbies, but like I think that if you're into guns and stuff, like you need to understand that like there's not really a practical application for a semi-automatic machine gun. Like hunting is one thing, and having a weapon that is designed for killing people is another thing.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too deep into the political discussion, because it's really more than a political discussion, and that's why they get so heated. But
Yep.
the difficulty with America is that there's already so many guns in America that like it's really hard practically to enact like a safe, like practical gun control that is not just going and trying to seize guns. That's just totally not practical or possible. So I think more the emphasis should be more on education and teaching people how to handle guns and maybe de-escalating the situations that lead people to reach for guns,
Mm-hmm.
rather than focusing on the guns themselves. Because Shane is also right that it matters who's using it, and you don't thing with guns is that they're so powerful that you don't even have to have a malintent to hurt somebody or even
Hmm.
kill somebody. Like that's why it's so important to be educated and to practice safety with guns because one little accident and they could kill you or someone that you love.
Yeah.
Um, so like yeah, keep the ammo separate. Lock it in a box. Lock the guns in a safe. If you don't have a safe, put a trigger guard on it. Keep the keys in a safe. Like I don't know. It's
Yeah. Never, yeah, and
it's
never point a gun at anything you don't mean to kill. I think Shane says that
right.
to Joey at one point in this movie.
It's even when it's not loaded. Like never. I
Yep.
was always taught never, ever. Like it doesn't matter if it's loaded or not. Just don't do it.
This is thanks for that answer, Hunter. I know it's a hard conversation, and it's a conversation that's almost impossible to have without. It's a loaded question, even if you're not trying to ask it in a loaded way. Right? There's so many things that go
Yeah.
through all of our minds. That both politically and personally and theologically and
Hmm.
piece after piece after piece after piece, and yet I think it's appropriate to have the conversation, or at least to ask yourselves this question. And I would encourage all of our listeners, people who've been listening along with us, to ask that question of, should our goal be to have no guns left in the valley,
Yeah.
or is it true that a gun is a tool like any other, and it's as good or bad as the one who holds it, or are both true? At
Hmm.
different points in my life, I've fallen on different sides of this thought process.
Hmm.
But it's very clear in this movie, once guns are brought out, the scope of violence changes.
Hmm.
It goes from bloody noses, and in fact, the person that Shane fights with in that opening brawl scene, which is a fun one,
Yeah.
um, ends up becoming a friend
Hmm.
of Shane's, and warns him about Riker's decision later on, and that causes Shane to arm up, and the body count grows.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Shane's argument is that you can't leave who you are. A man has to be what he is. He can't break the mold. I don't fully buy
See,
that
I
argument.
disagree with that.
I don't buy that argument, and I think that the writer actually does a really good job of talking about this question.
Mm,
At least that's one of the
yeah.
things that I was gathering as I was watching it was, what does
Yeah.
it mean to be a cowboy? What does it mean to be who you were made to be?
Hmm.
And Brady's answer changes in this movie, and
Right.
so I'd love to transition to that
Yeah.
conversation, because it adds a different type of depth, and I was really excited about watching this movie, but I'm here excited to hear your synopsis
Yeah.
and movement for us into it.
Yeah. Um, I'm so excited to talk about the writer. I I watched it this past weekend and I like want to watch it again. Um I'm sad I didn't get to watch it again before our conversation, but um so the writer is a film directed by Chloe Zhao. It's one of the two movies that she shot on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Um and I I think I saw it because I someone had recommended to me Nomadland, which came out in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was like one of the most unique movies I've ever seen in a good way. Um, and I was like, oh, The Rider. I'm going to try another Chloe Zhao movie, and I was not prepared for like how deep this movie would hit me.
Mm.
um, because it is also one of the most unique movies that you'll ever see in that, Brady is playing himself. His sister is playing herself. His father is actually his father. Almost all the people in this movie are playing who they are in real life.
Huh.
And it is but it is a fictional story, and it's presented as like a movie. So but it is based on true events, also. Um Brady, in an interview, he said it's kind of like 60% my real life and 40% uh, making it more dramatic. And it's about a cowboy living in South Dakota, and he trains horses. Like his day job is like training horses. That's what his family does, and then he also does rodeo. So he rides bucking horses, and he gets uh, he gets injured. Like a horse basically stomps on his head, and they put a plate in his head and everything, and he's told by the doctors that he can't be around horses anymore because it's too dangerous. And that's kind of where the movie starts, and it's sort of his journey, because like horses are his entire life. It's what he's been training to do his whole life, and it can't do it.
Yeah.
um and this tension between like, wanting to get back into rodeo, wanting to be with horses, but also needing to take care of his sister and his family, um, and that personal struggle. Um, and like this movie makes me cry every time I watch it, because it's just like, oh, I before I get too deep into it, Eric, I want to hear how you responded to it, what you thought.
Watching this movie, I was thinking about Shane because I'd watched it beforehand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking about pacing, and I was thinking about silence, and this movie opens with a close-up shot of a horse. There's this beautiful, stunning videography of this horse. I think it's Gus.
Mm-hmm.
And time is shown to pass throughout this movie with cut shots of Brady at home eating a pizza or doing some super mundane thing in life, sitting on the couch. And then the beautiful South Dakota views, whether it's of
Mm-hmm.
horses or valleys. And that pacing was really impactful for me.
Mm.
There's so much silence in this movie, and there's so much that you're reading into Brady's face.
Mm.
This is a movie that shows, it doesn't tell.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't hear Brady verbalize the battle happening internally.
Mm-hmm.
You hear it through some of the things that his friends and family are saying, but then you primarily see it in his eyes, in the flashbacks, in his dreams,
Mm-hmm.
in his interactions with Lane.
Yeah.
It was a very moving movie.
Mm-hmm.
I made the decision to watch the trailer before watching it, and I'm
Mm.
glad I did because it prepared me for a movie of pretty intense depth that I don't think I would have been that I think I needed that preparation, at least where I was And I watched this last night. I needed that preparation in order
Yeah.
to enter into that head and heart space. I'm trying to think of a scene or two that particularly stood out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing that we'll talk about Lane.
Yeah.
Those scenes where he's helping Lane ride, pretend to ride,
Mm-hmm.
and you can share more about that.
Yeah.
The training scenes where he's training the horses,
Mm-hmm.
especially with breaking Apollo and then getting the chance to ride him, and then the heartbreaking scene with Apollo later on.
Yeah.
There's so many
I'm
things.
just gonna say, like, if you want to experience this movie fresh, now's a good time to stop
Yeah,
the
stop the
podcast. If you've heard
podcast.
enough and you're like, all right, I want to watch this movie, all right, stop the podcast. If you're
Yeah.
in a car, just sit in silence for a little while. It'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. It'll feel like you're watching this movie.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
Shane. Both so little. It's like words per minute are probably lower in these two movies than in almost anything else.
Yeah.
And I'll the we're going to talk about this later. I know because we have to, but the visual, or one of the visuals that I'll remember, and the piece that got me emotionally
Mm-hmm.
was Brady at the very end trying to figure out if he's going to be at this rodeo after yelling at his dad and telling him he doesn't want to be like him, and then looking over and seeing his dad and his sister.
We'll get there.
It's so good. It's
Can I share a couple
Please.
film things? These are a couple film things that are maybe not how it shaped me personally, and I'll get to those too. But this is like our about time episode. Roles reversed. I kept going to all the big scenes, and you're like, stop,
slow down.
Anyway.
What is this?
So I guess these are a couple things that I had never seen in a movie before that really struck me. One was lighting and the way that this movie is shot. In the interviews, they talk about golden hour, which if you are familiar with photography,
Mm-hmm.
you'll know it's a certain time of day where the light is just perfect and it lasts an hour or so. I think it depends on where you are, what time it is, but it's just light that is perfect for photography. And they she worked really closely with her cinematographer to schedule specifically during golden hour so that they could film. And I think they were pretty strict about it, not only filming during golden hour. So that shot of the one that stood out for me was when Brady is just standing on the plains looking out over the Badlands. There's the mountain in the distance and you see the sky. That is one of the most gorgeous shots I've seen in any movie. Any movie, including Dune or whatever you can think of scenes with stunning visuals. That scene, because it's just the natural beauty of the Badlands in golden hour, captured at the perfect time with the perfect framing, with a really steady hand. It's just and the whole movie is like that, and
you don't need
there
CGI
are contrasts
when God's already created the perfect
right.
visuals.
Yeah, and it's just lovely, and I love it to death. And the horse breaking, and then the other thing that leads into that is the horse breaking, which is actually Brady breaking a horse live in front of the camera.
I was wondering about that. Okay.
Yeah, those are actual clients' horses that he was hired to break, and they went and filmed him doing it. And part of how this movie came about is Chloe Zhao was visiting the Pine Ridge Reservation, and she saw Brady breaking a horse, and kind of got to know Brady and his story a little bit more. And I think she says in the interview that I saw him, being dance partner and enemy and friend and lover to this horse, and I thought that he could do the same thing to the audience, to the camera. And like I'm not like a horse person. I like horses. I think they're cool. I never spent enough time with them to really like be a horse guy.
I'm with you.
But um but it's just beautiful watching him form a relationship with this horse, and horses really are beautiful animals. Um and it it's filmed in the golden hour. So that those are two things that I just think are really unique about this movie just as a film in general. Um,
Mm. This is that information you've given me, Hunter, is really helpful to me to understand because as I was watching this movie, at times it feels like a documentary
mhm.
more than a movie. And some of
Yeah.
that can be a little bit jolting.
Mm.
Honestly, like at one point there, Brady's hanging out with some of his cowboy friends
Hmm.
around a fire and they're doing some stupid stuff because they're
Yeah,
teenagers or whatever, and like they're jumping over a fire and whatever. But then they
yeah.
kind of each just take turns talking about some of their worst injuries,
Hmm.
getting stomped on and getting thrown off and fighting through the pain, and then they talk about
Right.
their friend Lane and
Hmm.
about how he was the best of them, possibly the best in the world.
Yeah.
And you haven't met Lane at that point. You know something's going to go
Hmm.
on and something's up. And then they just take a moment to like pray for Lane, and it's like
Hmm.
I was just very kind of confused.
Yeah.
As a whole, it makes sense in the whole movie, but that
Hmm.
extra context of it felt so
Yeah.
real. It felt so real because it was
Yeah.
so real.
Yeah.
Like this is a whole side of things, like modern day cowboys that I know nothing about, am
Hmm.
0% interested in being part of my life, and yet am grateful to have experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. That campfire scene is also one of the standout scenes to me. There's nothing really like it in any movie because you're right. It is like a documentary. Um,
But tell me, how has this movie shaped you? Why did we actually bring it? Like you've talked about the visuals and things you haven't seen before in other
yeah.
movies, and I'm sure that's part of the answer. But why else or how else?
Um, well, I think one of the first things is that I I can't remember the first time I watched this movie. It must have been a few years ago, like 2019-ish. Um, well, no, it was after 2020. But um, in 2016, my senior year of college, I broke my leg skiing, and um, I was able to heal pretty well, and um, but they're and it's nothing as serious as Brady's injury, but they do a really good job of like portraying the boredom of having an injury, where Brady's just like sitting around watching cartoons, eating up a pizza, like just doing nothing because like
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of injuries you're not supposed to do anything. um and yet your mind is still somewhat active, so like it's just like you're just sitting around doing nothing and not being active, and the struggle that he has where he starts to get better, heal up, and he talks about getting back on the horse and that kind of thing was like somewhat similar. Maybe mine was much less extreme than his, but like getting back into skiing and stuff. Um, because like, yeah, technically my leg is strong enough, but there's always that kind of doubt when you get back into something after a somewhat severe injury of like, well, am I gonna be able to do this? Is it gonna be safe? Like, because if you haven't had an injury and you're doing this sport, I think sometimes you don't really realize how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
Um, and so the the struggle he has of like he's like slowly realizing that he can't do rodeo anymore, and it's clear that this was like something really important to him, and like he was well known. Like a kid comes up to him when he's working in the Dakota Mart, and a kid comes up like, "Hey, are you Brady Blackburn?" Like, um, and they take a picture with him, and
Mm-hmm.
they're like, "Yeah, hope to see you out there again, Brady." He's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna heal up," and you
Oh,
just see this,
just see in his eyes.
yeah, and he has so many struggles of like, because in this context, in this culture, like being a man means rodeoing. Um,
Manliness means
you know,
getting back on the horse.
getting back on the horse, fighting through the pain. That's what a cowboy does. Um, but what is really more manly at this point? Is it getting yourself killed on a horse, or is it working at the Dakota Mart so that you can feed your family? And I find in the struggle with like manhood in our day and age is that because like violence isn't really necessary for most of us, like um we try to find other ways to like express that. Like I think that's part of the reason why violent video games are so popular, and like shooting and fighting, because it offers kind of an outlet for that sort of like energy. The sport does too, but um there's I find there's kind of like a sometimes there's an inverse relationship between what seems manly and what is manly.
Mm.
Um, and I think about Brady working in that Dakota Mart. Like it's humiliating, you know, to have been this like rodeo star, and then people see you working at the checkout counter, and when Victor comes by, who's the guy who owns Apollo, and he's like, um, "Hey, what are you doing here, Brady?" Brady's like, "Well, we need the money, since he can't train horses, like
Mm-hmm.
he can't make money." Um and so I guess the final tension, because I've been on a long tangent here, but the I guess the resolution of that, which is Brady makes a compromise where I guess it's kind of like the really the only um significant dialogue that specifically mentions his internal struggle. And Apollo, which is this horse that Brady trains, and um, kind of like as a personal way to get back into it, and Apollo had like some bad habits because some guys tried to ride him, and you know Brady's like, man, that'd be a real shame to waste him in the rodeo because he's a good horse, and Brady ends up training him, and getting to ride him, and it's a real like triumphant moment
So
for
beautiful.
Brady. And then Apollo like tries to jump a barbed wire fence and gets hurt, and they have to put him down. And Brady is talking to his sister, and he's like, when a horse gets hurt, it's not fair to the horse to keep them alive, because the horse can't run and jump and do all of the things that makes a horse happy, and it's not really a fair existence for the horse. And Brady's like, the same thing happened to me, but I'm a person, so I got to live. And there's this real, like, training horses for Brady is really dangerous. He could die training horses, if something happens. You can't control every variable. And that's true in real life for him, too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you watch him train horses, you're like, he was born to do that, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
um, and I think like the net impact that he could have on the world is much greater training horses than it is, having some other job. At least that's kind of the thesis of the movie. And like risk. I think there's a healthy medium between being stupid and, riding horses that could kill you versus like taking on a certain amount of risk to do something really good and something that you're really good at. Um, and that's the tension that I struggle with, like whenever I go skiing, is like, yeah, skiing is pretty dangerous, but you know, it's it makes me feel alive. And what am I supposed to do if I can't feel alive? And you
Yeah.
know, maybe for you it's not skiing, but it could be something else. Um, and you have to really think hard about that risk and um, be cautious and careful. And I also think about how one of the most risky things that we do every day is drive a car. So anyway, and sorry, I don't want to say too much, but we could talk about lanes.
I'm gonna break in here because you shared a quote that I think could be read one of two ways. Um, you and it's that main point
Hmm.
where Brady's talking with his sister about Apollo getting injured. He says, I got hurt like Apollo did, but I'm a person, so I got to live. If any animal got hurt like I did, they'd have to be put down." And there's the one reading of it that says, because you're a human, you get to live, in the midst of
Hmm.
that. But the other reading is just actually what I read at that point. I got hurt like Apollo did, but I'm a person, so I gotta live. It's like more of like this. He almost wishes he didn't live.
Hmm.
And in fact, directly following the scene, he decides to jump back in the rodeo to, as his dad says, pretty much to die. Like
Yeah.
go die. If you're gonna do that, you're gonna kill yourself.
Hmm.
Um, and I think there's this. I think at this point in the movie, in Brady's life, he is torn in two. He's trying to figure out: is it better for me to live and do something, as you're saying, that's not what I was made to do,
Hmm.
to support my sister and my dad and my family, or is it better for me to die doing the thing that I feel like I was made to do at the rodeo, so I can go out in a blaze of glory?
Right.
And I think at this point, he's leaning towards the second.
Yeah.
It's better for me to die doing the thing that I was, in my mind, made to do.
Hmm.
But at the end, he ends up on the other side. And so I want to talk about that scene, Hunter, because,
Could we talk about mention Lane?
well,
Or
directly following that scene, we
okay.
we then go into Lane's story. Right, the
Right.
movie ends with Lane. So I was thinking this scene might be a good way to lead us into that. So after talking to his sister and saying, "I got to live," Brady puts all of his gear in the back of his pickup truck to drive to the rodeo where he signed up. And his dad, it's like, confronts him and says, "No, don't do this."
Hmm.
Now his dad is not a character that we've really empathized with in this movie. First time we interact with him, he's driving home drunk. He puts all their money into gambling and all these things. Brady's mom, died a few years earlier, and Brady's just like his mom. He's stubborn, just like her, and all these pieces.
Hmm.
But Brady yells at his dad as his dad walks away after Brady said, "No, I'm going to the rodeo regardless of what you do." He says, "I'm not going to end up like you." He yells at him and drives away. He's at the rodeo, seeing the other cowboys, getting all his things ready. Throughout the movie, his hands have been he's having
Hmm.
like many like seizures. His right hand seizes up because of the brain damage, which is the
Hmm.
reason why he can't ride. Can't do go in the rodeo. But we see this Brady getting ready for the rodeo, looking at the horses, looking at the other cowboys. Throughout this entire movie, whenever it's like, as time passes, whenever you pan onto one of Brady's friends, you just see new injuries, broken arms, broken legs, casts, whatever it might be. You kind of see a little bit of that there, and then Brady looks out and sees his dad and his sister standing at the edge of the fence, looking in. They showed up to watch him ride because they love him. And one of his friends says, yo, hey Brady, like you're up, like it's your time." And Brady looks back at his dad and his sister. And he says, "Go get him, cowboy." Or like he says, pretty much says, "I'm done."
They give him a head nod.
You give him the head nod, and then his friend says, he calls him a cowboy as he walked away. That idea that you're still a cowboy even if you're not riding. And he walks away to his dad and his sister, and what you see from a distance is him hugging his dad. And that's the scene that gets me. That's the the moment where
that's like my big scene. That's my yeah.
that's where Brady has finally made the decision of what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be him in his life?
Yeah. And I actually tried to keep track of the moments where his hand seizes up.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is when he's holding a horse figurine by his mother's grave.
Yeah.
He closes around the horse figurine. Second is when he's tying a bandana on to go see Lane, to visit Lane. The third is when he is training a horse after he gets to training again and his hand gets stuck on the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of raises the stakes a bit. And then the fourth time is when he's practicing on the practice rodeo thing, and he's about to get off and he can't get his hand out of the thing. And then the last time is that last scene at the rodeo. Yeah, that scene is whenever I think about this movie, I think about that scene, and it's specifically when he's looking down at his hand, holding the reins, clenching onto the reins, and you don't actually see him let go of it. They cut away, and then his friend is holding the reins, so presumably Brady has let go of it, and he's walking away. And I think that to me represents Brady. He's letting go of rodeo, and this thing that he felt like was what really defined him as a man, and he's choosing his family, and instead of this rodeo and getting killed and having glory. And I think glory is really something that a lot of men are drawn to,
Mm-hmm.
going all the way back to the Iliad with Achilles and Hector and all these great heroes. Achilles is, he's all about the glory, and the glory that you can win in battle or win even in dying,
Yeah.
the legacy that you leave. And there's a real, like, if Brady were to die, they would glorify him.
Oh yeah.
And he decides that his family is more important than that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a a song by 21 Pilots called Old East Station, and one of the lines that I think about a lot that relates to this is I think the song is really about parenthood. You can relate it to it's poetic enough that you can relate it to your life, pushing through things. And but there's a line that says, "When purging things you used to love, everything must go." And there's a lot of decisions that I have to make as a dad. Deciding to be a stay-at-home dad and take care of my kids and my family, and uh, where I can't do a lot of the stuff that I used to do. And I know it's for a season of life, but um, my family is much more important to me than
Mm-hmm.
going out on a ski slope and breaking my leg.
Yep.
um,
So, Hunter, what do you think? Shane made the argument that a man has to be what he is. He can't break the mold. But what you just shared about Brady and the quote you just shared about 21 Pilots seems to make a different argument to me.
mhm.
Is that what the writer is saying? Would the writer agree with that statement? A man has to be what he is. He can't break the mold, or no?
Yeah, I don't think so. I will reference Thomas Hardy's statement that novels are impressions, not arguments. Um, and so I think the impression that the writer gives really is against the idea that you can't break the mold. And I think I agree with that. I think that every man has to decide for themselves what being a man really means for them. But for me, it means using what strength I have for others, for my family, my wife, my kids, my friends, um, and that to me is far more heroic and manly than than getting my head stomped on or breaking my leg on a ski race or um, shooting a bunch of guys in a saloon. Um, because it might be very fun to watch someone shoot people in a saloon. And I've been playing Red Dead Redemption 2, which is like just like an amalgamation of all the westerns you've ever seen, and you get to walk around in them. But uh, it might be that stuff is fun and cool, and it gets all the glory. But what's really gonna last is people and
Yeah.
life itself, and whether maybe you don't, maybe you're not married or something, but and you don't have kids, but like even your life is just as valuable, and I think Lane's story really speaks to that um, too.
Yeah. Hey, I agree. I think that holds so much strength. My pastor's been sharing a quote, uh, it's sticking in my mind. Everybody wants their dad to be huge, strong, able to dole out punishment and whatever is needed in any situation when it comes to other people. But when it comes to you, you want that same dad. But when it comes to you breaking the rules, you want your same dad to be full of grace, full of love, to never use that strength that you perceive that he has towards and uses against others. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's actually one of the things we can celebrate as Christians is that
Mm-hmm.
while we fail at that, while in reality we're much closer to Brady's dad in life than to anything else, our heavenly Father
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
has
And
that strength, has that love, has that grace, has that mercy and truth, all wrapped up in one ultimate strength, ultimate love at the same
and
time.
I think Jesus is a great example of redeeming manhood. Um,
Agreed.
because Jesus is strong,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but he's gentle and humble at heart, and he uh, he defeats death
Mm.
itself.
Well, can we end by talking about Lane? about Brady's
Yes.
interactions with Lane, because I don't think, because I see Brady being the most joyful version of himself when he is with
Mm,
Lane. In
yeah.
fact, that joy is how the movie ends. So, can you tell us a little bit about Lane, just like a 30-second
Yeah.
synopsis of Lane, and then.
So so Lane is Brady's like best friend from childhood, and then Lane had an accident um, that rendered him. He's in a wheelchair. He has to sign things because he can't really talk. I think it's some kind of like nervous system, like broke his back or something like that, where he's really he's in rough shape, and he's living in a rehab center, and Brady goes to visit him whenever he can. Um, Interesting tidbit is that in the movie, it's kind of assumed to make it more dramatic that Lane has gotten hurt at a rodeo riding a bull or something. In real life, it was actually a car accident.
Mm,
Um, and Brady goes to visit Lane, and they sort of they talk, they have fun, they make a lot of jokes. Apparently, Lane actually came up with a lot of the jokes himself. Like they had it written to be more somber, but Lane was like, "No, I'm just rub some dirt in it,"
mm-hmm.
and all those kinds of jokes are from himself. He's a funny guy, but they do these scenes where he's trying to teach Lane to ride again, and so they put him on like a dummy horse, and Brady pulls the reins and stuff for him so that he can kind of imagine riding again. And I mean, like when Brady stops in the truck and just cries, like he knows that Lane is not going to ride again. Um, but it's this perseverance and endurance of that Lane has, to keep living and enjoying being alive in spite of the fact that he's never going to ride a bull again. Um, it's really
And that's what
really
pushes
beautiful.
Brady to that same
Right.
space.
Yeah.
That relationship is so beautiful in this movie.
Yeah.
And I think it's done so well. Right?
Hmm.
It's, at least as a viewer, I was like, Brady and Lane are in the same place. They look different. Have had different injuries, but Lane's making something out of his injury and about his life
Hmm.
now. That by the end of the movie, Brady has made that same decision, and
Yeah.
then it brings that full picture because it
Hmm.
ends with Brady at Lane's bedside, holding his hands and having Lane lead him, backing up the horse or turning left or turning right or going into a full gallop, riding on Gus's
Hmm.
back. And while
Yeah.
Brady is having Lane do that, visualize that Lane is beaming, and Brady's mind goes, and so visually we go to see Brady riding across the range on Gus's back at golden hour,
Hmm.
feeling completely free, wind through his hair, even as he's making that decision to never ride again.
Hmm.
It's a different way of having the cowboy ride off into the sunset.
Right. Yeah. Not into the grave.
Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts, Hunter?
Um. Oh, I had one and it slipped away. Uh. My final thought will be, I think, um, Cowboy Up. And when I say Cowboy Up, I mean maybe Cowboy Up means to reject the usual meaning of that. to be a real man. Real men put other lives before their own glory.
Love it. American Western is such a very specific genre to our country. And it's been really interesting talking with you about this and to have a hard conversation.
Yeah.
Or maybe more specifically, to have a conversation about hard hitting movies that communicate the American ideal and manliness, communicate about the war, about violence, about what does strength, true strength mean in ways that both go along with and subvert cultural narrative. I think a lot can be learned from these spaces. And I think that a good film causes more questions than gives answers.
Yeah. Yeah, as an alternative to my final thing is something I used to pray a lot when I was 13 or 14 is that I would rather be a real man than seem like be a godly man than seem like one. And I think I'm farther along on that journey than I was. I still have a long way to go, and I think I always will.
Yep.
But I think the writer is really a representation of that struggle.
Journey before destination.
Right. Well, destination does matter. We've already gone on.
Hunter, great conversation. Yes, the sun has set in this podcast episode. And we will see you or talk with you all again some point soon. Probably East of Eden.
Yeah.
I'll see you, Hunter.
Cheers.